Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last video we had created the logic inside of our Flutter application to actually load up our config file and then create a singleton instance for our app config class so that it's available throughout our application for things that might require access to the specific config information that we have inside of main.json. So similar to that, what we're going to be doing in this video is that we're going to be creating first our HTTP service, which is going to allow us to interact with the REST API by sending GET requests. And once we're done defining our HTTP service, we're then going to be registering it as a singleton using the getIt package in the setup function as we had done beforehand. So without anything further to do, let's get into it and let's see how to do it. So to get started, what I'll do is that inside of my lib folder, I'll create a new folder and I'll call this services. And inside of services, I'm going to create a new file and I'll call this http:/service.dart. Once I have the http service.dart file created, now comes the time to actually start coding the service. So I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call this http service. And then this class is going to be responsible for actually handling the logic of sending requests. The first thing that we need is that we need access to the actual HTTP client that we're going to be using, and that is the DO client. So I'm going to firstly go to the top and I'm going to import the actual package. So I'm going to add the comment here for packages, and then I'm going to do import do.dart. Once we have the DO package imported, the next thing that I'll do right now is that I'll import the getIt package as well, and it'll become apparent later down in the video as to why we need getIt, but just import getIt as well. And finally, I'll import the actual config model as well. So I'll do .models/config.dart or app config, sorry. So now that I have the app config model imported as well, I'm going to create a variable inside of my HTTP service, which is going to store a reference to our DO instance, and I'm going to instantiate a new DO instance. Once I have that, I'll also create another final variable. I'll call it getIt, which will store a reference to our actual getIt instance. So I'll do it getIt.instance. And I'll define the type for it as well. So it's getIt. And once we're done with this, we're ready to actually define these two new variables that are required within our class. That is going to be our base URL for the API, which, if you remember, now is present inside of our app config model that we've instantiated, and our API key, because every request that we send to the actual MovieDB API requires the API key to be present in the query string as well. And once we have this, I'm going to create the HTTP service constructor for our class. And every time this class is constructed, what I'll like to do is that first I'll like to get the app config. So I'll do app config_config equals to, and I'll do the getIt variable that we have, and then I'll do get. And then inside of these triangle brackets, I'm going to do app config, and then I'll add the remaining circular brackets, and we should be good to go. So what this will do is that it'll ask the getIt package to get for us a class of type app config, and then it'll put that in the config variable for us to access. Once we have this, what I'm going to do is that I'll set the base URL equal to _config dot, and then as you can see, base API URL. And then after that, I'll do API key equals to _config dot, and then we'll do API key. So with this, then we can do command save and we can move on to the next step, which is going to be creating the actual function that is going to be responsible for sending a GET request to our actual API. So this function is going to return a future of type response, and this response class is provided to us by DO. Then we're going to have this method being called get. The method is going to be provided a path. So this path is going to be everything that is followed after the base URL, not the actual whole complete URL. And this path would not include the query string. For the query string, what we'll do is that we'll have a optional argument of type map, which will have string, dynamic, and then it'll be called query, And then following this, what I'll do is that I'll make this function an async function, and then I'll open up the function body using curly brackets. Now here, what the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a try catch block, and inside of my try block, I have to first build the complete URL to send the request to. To build the complete URL, it'll be really easy. We'll first need the base URL, and then following the base URL, we'll tag on the path. So I'll do underscore path. So we'll have the base URL, which could be, for example, in our case, google.com, if I'm making a string. And once we have the main URL defined, we're going to have a /, which we'll add to the path. Don't worry about that. So this / will be a path part of the path. And following that, we'll just have the path, which could be like movie/popular. So this would be the path that this would be the part that corresponds to the path. And this would be the path that corresponds to the base URL. And in our case, the base URL is going to be the actual base API URL. So yeah, that's pretty much how we're going to be creating the URL. The next thing that we require is going to be our query string. So instead of us manually going inside of our URL, adding a question mark, and then adding the query and then adding all of the query parameters, for example, API key, and then their values, and kind of going like that, Dio provides us with a very efficient method where we provide it a map which has strings as its keys and then dynamic as its values, and it'll take each of the key inside of that map and it'll add those as a query string into the URL that we are actually going to be sending the request to automatically without us having to go in and change the URL. So now we're going to build our query, and regardless of whatever gets passed into us by this optional query parameter, there are two things that are always required by the API when we send a request. The first is the actual API key. I'll add a key for API key, and then I'll add the value for that, which is going to be API key, and then also language as well. So in what language do we actually require our results? And I'm going to do English US. So once this is done, we can do Alt-Shift-F command save, and now we have the query defined as well. But what if the user that's using the GET request actually wants to send them some additional query values? For that, what we can do is that we can check that if the query that was sent to us is not equal to null, and if it isn't, which means that there were some extra values sent to us for the query, we can do query.addAll. So we're going to add to the query dictionary that we created, or the query map that we created, all of the key value pairs that we have inside of the query that was passed in, and do command save. And finally, the last thing we are going to do is that we're going to return the actual dio.get method, and we're going to send the URL for the actual path, and then the query parameters requires a map which we had already created in the previous step, so we'll pass in that, and we'll do Alt-Shift-F command save. Don't forget to use the await function here, because we are going to be sending the response back. So once we have this, the final thing that I'm going to do is that instead of using the cat statement, I'll change the cat statement to on dio error catch. And what we're going to catch an exception. And once we have an exception, I'm just going to copy these two things in because they're like really simple, just print statements, unable to perform GET request, and then we'll print the dio error and do command save. So now that we have our actual HTTP service defined, the last step that we have to do is that we have to register this service so that it's accessible to all of the other services that are present inside of our application. So the way I'm going to do this is that I'm going to go to our splash page and then to the setup function, and then the same way that we registered a singleton for app config class, I'm going to do getIt.register singleton, and then I'm going to say that the type of the singleton is going to be HTTP service, and then I'm going to open up the brackets, and inside of there I'm going to instantiate a new instance of HTTP service. I'm going to add a comma, and then I'm going to add the semicolon, do Alt-Shift-F command save. I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to make sure that the HTTP service is imported. So I'm going to remove the import statement that had already been added by Dart. I'm going to go down. I'm going to add a new section for services, and here I'm going to import /services/HTTP service.dart. And with this, we're good to go. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to click on start debugging, and I'll wait for the app to actually launch on the simulator. But before I pause this video, I'd like to quickly give you a side note as to the way that we actually registered the singletons, the actual series in which we register each of the individual singletons, which is we do the app config first, and this is HTTP service, is crucial because for the HTTP service to actually function properly, the app config needs to be already configured and available, because if you remember, inside of the constructor for our HTTP service, we require access to our app config. So the way in which we register our singletons is important. So with that, I'm going to pause this video here and I'll resume it once we have the app actually running on the simulator. Okay, everyone, welcome back. The app is actually running on the simulator, and if I reload, you're going to see that we see our splash page, and then we actually get the actual screen shown to us as well. So with that, I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one. Thank you.